3:47 in the morning. The grandfather clock in the servants' hall of Ravenshire Estate chimed once, then fell silent, as if even time itself was exhausted by the endless rhythm of servitude. Dr. Lyra Evangeline Hargrove stood at the industrial steel sink in the scullery, her hands submerged in water so scalding hot it had stopped registering as pain 20 minutes ago. The skin on her knuckles was cracked and bleeding, staining the soapy water pale pink. She counted mechanically. 178 dinner plates, 179. 23 champagne flutes from the conservatory still waited. The count never ended. 42 years old. Once upon a lifetime, those same hands had held a scalpel steady enough to remove a tumor the size of a golf ball from a Marine sergeant's frontal lobe at Walter Reed Medical Center. 3 millimeters of error would have cost the man his ability to speak. Her hands hadn't wavered. Not once. She'd saved 317 lives over 15 years of surgical practice. Now those hands scrubbed congealed béarnaise sauce off china plates worth more than most people's monthly rent. The irony tasted like copper and failure. Behind her, the sharp click of Italian leather on Vermont marble announced Mrs. Isolde Thorne's arrival before the woman spoke. The head housekeeper moved with the measured precision of someone who'd spent 45 years perfecting the art of silent judgment. Each footstep was a metronome of contempt. "You missed the champagne flutes in the conservatory, Hargrove." The voice could have etched glass. Lyra's shoulders tensed, but she kept her hands moving. 180 plates. She didn't turn around. 6 months of employment had taught her that eye contact with Mrs. Thorne was an invitation to extended humiliation. "I'll get them when I finish the dinner service, ma'am. You'll get them now." The words cracked like a whip. "Or you'll explain to Lord Ravenshire why his property is being neglected by incompetent staff who can't follow simple instructions." Incompetent. The word hung in the cold air between them, heavy with malice. Lyra had spent 4 years in Army Medical Corps in Iraq, had performed emergency amputations in field hospitals while mortar rounds shook the surgical tent, had saved lives when supplies ran out and power failed, and the only thing standing between soldiers and death was her training and her will. But to Isolde Thorne, she was just another incompetent maid. Lyra pulled her raw hands from the water. The skin was white and puckered, wrinkled like old paper. She dried them on the rough cotton towel hanging from her apron string and met the older woman's gaze for exactly 1 second, long enough to show she'd heard, short enough to avoid confrontation. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Thorne's smile was the kind that never reached her eyes. She was 63, rail thin, with silver hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. Everything about her was sharp angles and cutting edges. She carried the perpetual scent of lavender that couldn't quite mask something else underneath. Something old and faintly rotten like flowers left too long in stagnant water. "And Hargrove," the housekeeper's voice dropped to a venomous whisper, "that child of yours. I heard singing coming from the basement last night. At midnight. Some little lullaby disturbing the entire household." Lyra's blood went cold. Cassielle, her 9-year-old daughter. "She had a nightmare, ma'am. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't." Mrs. Thorne stepped closer, invading Lyra's space with deliberate menace. "Lord Ravenshire pays handsomely for silence and efficiency, not nursery rhymes and disruption. One more disturbance from that blind child, and you're both on the street. And good luck finding another position in this county with no references and a reputation for harboring unauthorized dependents." The threat was delivered with the casual efficiency of someone swatting an insect. Mrs. Thorne turned on her heel and walked away, each footstep a punctuation mark. "You are nothing here." Lyra waited until the sound faded completely before she allowed herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage she couldn't afford to express. She looked down at her cracked, bleeding knuckles and thought about the $480,000 in medical debt that had brought her to this moment. $480,000. That was the number that had destroyed her life. The cost of 18 months of experimental treatments for the glioblastoma that had eaten her husband's brain one cell at a time. James had been 39 when the headaches started, 40 when the seizures began, 41 when he died in a hospice room that smelled like disinfectant and hopelessness, holding Lyra's hand and whispering that he was sorry, so sorry, for leaving her alone. 2 years later, James was gone. The debt was immortal. Lyra had tried everything. Sold their house in Alexandria, Virginia, liquidated retirement accounts, maxed out every credit card, borrowed from colleagues who stopped returning calls after the third request. The hospital had been understanding at first, offering payment plans and sympathy. Then came the collection agencies, the lawsuits, the wage garnishment that took 70% of every paycheck, leaving her unable to afford rent and food simultaneously. You can't perform neurosurgery when you're working 3 jobs just to keep a roof over your daughter's head. The medical board doesn't care about your circumstances when your hands shake from exhaustion and you've been awake for 40 hours straight. One mistake on the operating table, one tremor at the wrong moment, and someone dies. So she'd let her medical license lapse, walked away from 15 years of training and practice. And when even that wasn't enough, when the eviction notice came, and Cassiel started sleeping in her winter coat because the utilities had been shut off, Lyra had done what desperate people have done since the beginning of recorded time. She'd taken the only job that didn't ask questions. Ravenshire Estate paid $12 an hour under the table. No benefits, no background checks, no questions about why a woman with a medical degree was willing to scrub floors. The posting had been specific: live-in housekeeping position, room and board included, discretion required. The basement room was barely larger than a closet, damp and cold and smelling of old stone, but it was warm enough, and the door had a lock. And it was better than the homeless shelter where they'd spent 3 nights before Lyra saw the job listing. It was survival, nothing more, nothing less. She gathered the champagne flutes from the conservatory, each one catching the pre-dawn light and throwing rainbows across walls covered in oil paintings of dead Ravenshires. The glasses were baccarat crystal, probably older than she was. They'd held wine that cost more per bottle than Lyra made in a week, consumed by guests at the annual Veterans Gala she'd served, but not attended. 300 guests in evening wear and diamonds and self-congratulation eating food prepared by a Michelin-starred chef flown in from Boston specifically for the occasion. Lyra had moved through them like a ghost in her black uniform, carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres, invisible and ignored, except for one moment, one fraction of a second when everything changed. She'd been serving the main course, seared scallops with citrus reduction and microgreens moving clockwise around the formal dining room. Lord Ezekiel Ravenshire sat at the head of the table presiding over the dinner with the weary air of a man fulfilling a tedious obligation. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost 6 months of her salary. No tie. The collar of his white shirt was open, revealing a thin scar that ran from his collarbone to somewhere beneath the fabric. He'd been mid-conversation with a silver-haired investment banker discussing market volatility and portfolio diversification in the flat tone of someone who'd heard the same conversation 1,000 times before. Lyra had set his plate down carefully. The faint clink of fine china on polished wood. Nothing more. Lord Ravenshire's head had turned. His gray eyes met hers, and the scent hit him like a physical blow. She saw it happen, saw his nostrils flare, saw his hand tighten on the stem of his wineglass. The crystal cracked. Not shattered, but a hairline fracture appeared running from base to rim like a lightning strike frozen in glass. "Excuse me." His voice was low, rough, like he hadn't used it properly in decades. He stood abruptly. The chair scraped against hardwood with a sound that made every head turn. "I need a moment." The entire dining room watched in stunned silence as Lord Ezekiel Ravenshire, reclusive billionaire master of a 50-room Gothic estate, the man who hadn't been seen in public more than twice a year, for the past 40 years, walked out of his own dinner party in the middle of the first course. And Lyra, whose hands had stayed steady during combat surgery but couldn't hold a tray of scallops without trembling, felt the birthmark on her left shoulder blade burst into white-hot flame. She found Cassiel in the library at 3 in the morning. The dinner service had ended in confusion. Guests had departed early, whispering about Lord Ravenshire's health and mental state. Mrs. Thorne had delivered a 20-minute lecture about professional conduct and how Lyra would be held personally responsible for any social awkwardness caused by the master's sudden departure. Lyra had nodded, apologized, promised it wouldn't happen again. Then she'd gone down to the basement to check on her daughter. Cassiel's cot was empty. Panic drove Lyra through the dark corridors of Ravenshire Estate like a woman possessed. The basement, the kitchen, the conservatory, the morning room. Each empty space ratcheted her fear higher until she was running her worn shoes slapping against marble, not caring anymore who heard her or what consequences would follow. The library was in the west wing, through oak doors with brass handles shaped like ravens, down a corridor lined with portraits of dead Ravenshires, their painted eyes following her progress with aristocratic disdain. To the double doors at the end, 12 feet high, carved with scenes from Greek mythology. Persephone descending into the underworld, Orpheus looking back at Eurydice and losing her forever. The doors stood open. Lyra burst through them, heart in throat, ready to grab Cassiel and run. Damn the job. Damn the debt. They'd figure something out. They had to. Her daughter sat cross-legged on a Persian rug, worth more than a house facing Lord Ezekiel Ravenshire. He occupied a leather armchair that looked like a throne holding a glass of amber liquid whiskey, probably from a bottle older than most countries. He wasn't drinking, just staring into the glass like it contained answers to questions he'd forgotten how to ask. Cassiel was talking, her voice soft but clear, carrying through the cavernous library. And Mama says I can't see anything, but that's not exactly true. I see colors around people, like halos, kind of. Auras, I call them. You have so much blue around you, mister. More blue than anyone I've ever met. The color of deep water and old grief. Lord Ravenshire's gaze flicked to Lyra. Up close his face was even more striking. All hard lines and sharp angles like he'd been carved from marble by an artist who specialized in tragic beauty. He looked to be in his early 40s, but something about his eyes suggested impossible age. They were the gray of storm clouds over the Atlantic, and they held centuries. Your daughter is very perceptive, Dr. Hargrove. The title stopped Lyra cold. Dr. Hargrove, not the maid, not Hargrove. Her proper title spoken aloud for the first time in 2 years. She crossed the room in 3 strides and scooped Cassiel into her arms. I'm so sorry, Lord Ravenshire. She must have sleepwalked. It won't happen again. We'll leave right now. I'll pack our things. The painting. Cassiel's voice cut through her mother's panic. Mama, look at the painting on the wall, above the fireplace. Lyra's eyes followed her daughter's pointing finger. The portrait was massive, 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide, in an ornate gilt frame. Oil on canvas. It showed a man and a woman in 18th century dress. The man was younger than the Ezekiel sitting before them now, but unmistakably the same person. Dark hair instead of silver, less haunted, almost happy. The woman was breathtaking, dark hair piled high in elaborate curls, a crimson gown with a low neckline, violet-gray eyes that seemed to follow the viewer, and on her left shoulder, clearly visible above the dress, a birthmark, star-shaped or flower-shaped depending on perspective. The artist had rendered it in meticulous detail, every petal, every fractured point, the exact pattern that had been etched into Lyra's own skin since the day she was born. Sir, Cassiel's voice was very small, very certain, the voice of a child who saw things others couldn't. My mama has a mark just like that lady in the painting, on her shoulder, exactly the same. The whiskey glass slipped from Ezekiel's fingers. It hit the floor and shattered. crystal shards scattered across Persian silk like diamonds, like stars, like 300 years of hope breaking into pieces. Lord Ezekiel Ravenshire stood slowly moving with the controlled precision of someone who didn't trust his own strength. He took one step toward Lyra, then another. His eyes never left hers. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, desperate, broken, raw with centuries of grief. "Show me. Please, Dr. Hargrove, show me the mark." Every instinct screamed at Lyra to run. This man, this stranger, this employer she'd barely spoken to in 6 months was looking at her like she was a ghost, like she was the answer to a prayer he'd stopped saying 300 years ago. "I don't understand what you want. The mark on your shoulder." His voice cracked, actually cracked. "Seraphina had one, exactly where you're touching now. I need to see it. I need to know if—" He stopped, breathed. "Please." Lyra's hands were shaking. The world had tilted sideways and nothing made sense anymore. But Cassiel was solid and warm in her arms, and that was real. That was true. So Lyra set her daughter down carefully on the rug, turned her back to Lord Ravenshire, and with fingers that fumbled on buttons she pulled down the collar of her uniform just enough to expose her left shoulder blade. The silence that followed was absolute. No breathing, no heartbeats. Even the clock on the mantel seemed to stop ticking. Then, very quietly, like a man standing at the edge of an abyss, Ezekiel Ravenshire spoke 3 words that changed everything. "You came back." His hand reached out, stopped an inch from her skin. The air between his palm and her birthmark crackled with something Lyra couldn't name. Static electricity, or something older. Something that predated electricity and language and the neat categories of science she'd spent her adult life believing in. Seraphina. The name was a prayer, a curse, a question wrapped in 3 centuries of longing. "My stars, you kept your promise. You found your way home." Lyra spun around, yanking her collar back up with shaking hands. "My name is Lyra. I don't know who Seraphina is, but I'm not her. I'm nobody special. Just a widow with crushing debt and a daughter to feed. Whatever you think you see, I don't think." Ezekiel's eyes were no longer gray. They were silver, bright and burning like molten metal. "I know. That mark, it's a soul seal. It binds 2 lives across lifetimes. When Seraphina died in my arms in 1720, she promised she'd find me again, that the stars would mark her return. I've been searching every face in every crowd for 612 years, and tonight, in that dining room, I smelled lavender and gunpowder and old magic, and I knew. I finally knew. 612 years. The number was impossible. Insane. Lyra grabbed Cassiel's hand. "We're leaving. Right now. Thank you for your hospitality, Lord Ravenshire, but my daughter and I, $480,000. The number stopped her like a bullet. She turned slowly. Ezekiel walked to the massive oak desk that dominated one corner of the library, opened a drawer, pulled out a leather checkbook that looked like it belonged in a museum. His handwriting was elegant and old-fashioned as he wrote all loops and flourishes that belonged to a different century. "That's your debt, isn't it? Medical bills from your husband's treatment, glioblastoma, experimental therapies that didn't work, collection agencies, lawsuits, wage garnishment. The reason you're here scrubbing my floors at 3 in the morning instead of saving lives in an operating theater." How did he know that? How did he know any of it? He tore the check free, held it out. The amount was written clearly, $480,000. "I'll pay it, every penny, wire transfer. It'll clear in 48 hours. In exchange for 90 days, 3 months. You stay here as my guest, not my employee. Let me prove what you are, what we are. If at the end of those 90 days I'm wrong, you take the money and leave. No strings, no obligations." Lyra stared at the check. Freedom, the ability to practice medicine again, to give Cassiel stability, security, a future that didn't involve basement rooms and hunger and cold. And if you're right, the question came out before she could stop it. Ezekiel's smile was infinitely sad. Then you'll remember, and I'll finally stop being alone. Cassiel tugged on Lyra's sleeve. Mama, his blue is turning gold, like sunrise, like hope. I think he's telling the truth. $480,000. Freedom from the crushing weight that had bent her spine and stolen her sleep for 2 years. All she had to do was stay in this Gothic mansion for 90 days and let this strange, broken man believe she was someone she wasn't. What choice did she have? What choice had she ever had? Lyra took the check. Her fingers brushed his. The shock that ran through her body was electric, painful, like touching a live wire. The birthmark on her shoulder blade blazed white-hot, and for just a second, less than a heartbeat, she saw something impossible. A ballroom, candlelight, a woman in a crimson gown dancing with a man in black velvet. Their laughter was the sound of pure joy. The mark on her shoulder glowed like starlight. The man leaned close to whisper, I will love you beyond death, beyond time, beyond the ending of all things. Then the vision vanished. Lyra stood in a library at 3 a.m, holding a check that would change her life, trying very hard not to believe in impossible things. 90 days, she heard herself say. Not 1 day more. Ezekiel Ravenshire bowed. Actually bowed like she was royalty instead of a broke widow cleaning toilets for $12 an hour. Thank you, my queen. The clock on the mantel struck 4. Somewhere in the walls, old wood settled and groaned. And in the shadows beyond the library doors, a figure watched in silence. Cornelius Blackwell had served the Ravenshire family for 280 years as chief financial officer. He knew every secret, every weakness, every vulnerability that could be exploited. And now he knew the greatest vulnerability of all. The Queen had returned. He pulled out his phone, typed a message to a contact saved only as Protocol 7. The screen's glow illuminated his face in the darkness, a face that showed no emotion. No surprise, just cold calculation. She's here. Initiate Phase 1. The endgame begins tonight. He hit send, smiled a smile that never reached his eyes, and disappeared into the darkness like smoke, leaving only the faint scent of old money and older betrayals. The game, after 612 years of waiting, was finally in play. The check cleared in exactly 48 hours. Lyra watched the numbers change on her phone screen in the lavender suite, sitting on a bed softer than clouds. The debt that had crushed her for 2 years, the lawsuits, the collection calls, the garnished wages, the constant knot of fear in her stomach simply disappeared, zeroed out, deleted from existence like it had never been real. $480,000, paid by a man who thought she was his dead wife, reincarnated. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt like she'd signed a contract written in a language she couldn't read, binding her to terms she didn't understand. You'll move to the East Wing immediately. Mrs. Thorne's voice could have etched acid on steel. She stood in the doorway of the lavender suite, her mouth pressed into a line so thin it barely existed. Everything about her posture screamed disapproval. Lord Ravenshire's direct orders. This suite is suitable for important guests. The pause before important guests carried an ocean of contempt. Lyra folded the last of Cassiel's threadbare clothes into their battered suitcase. Everything they owned in the world fit in 2 bags. That's very generous of Lord Ravenshire. Generous? Mrs. Thorne's laugh was sharp as broken glass. The entire household is talking Dr. Hargrove, a peasant maid and her blind child elevated to the guest wing overnight. Lord Ravenshire paying off your debts, spending hours alone with you in the library. It's unseemly. It's scandalous. And when his obsession fades, and it will fade, you'll fall much harder than you rose. I'll personally ensure it. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Cassiel sat on the 4-poster bed hugging her stuffed rabbit. She has black smoke around her, Mama. It's getting thicker, like oil spreading on water. I know, baby. Lyra zipped the suitcase with more force than necessary. But we only have to stay 90 days. Then we leave. We'll get an apartment. I'll retake the medical board exams. Everything will go back to normal." Even as she said it, the lie tasted bitter. Nothing would ever be normal again. The lavender suite occupied the entire third floor of the east wing, accessible by a private spiral staircase that wound up from the main hall. Lyra climbed it with Cassiel's hand in hers, their footsteps muffled by carpet so thick it felt like walking on clouds. The suite was larger than their entire apartment in Alexandria had been. A sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Vermont mountains. A bedroom with a canopy bed that could sleep four. A bathroom with a clawfoot tub and fixtures that looked like they belonged in Versailles. The walls were papered in silk the color of twilight. The furniture was French provincial, delicate, expensive, museum quality. And everywhere in crystal vases on every surface, fresh lavender filled the air with a scent that made Lyra's head swim. "It smells like the garden where Daddy proposed to you." Cassiel's voice was soft with wonder. "The botanical gardens in Alexandria. How did Lord Ravenshear know?" Lyra had no answer. She unpacked mechanically, hanging their few clothes in a closet the size of their old bathroom. When she opened the dresser drawers, she found them already lined with fresh paper scented with, of course, lavender. Someone had been preparing this room, waiting for her. A knock at the door made her jump. Edmund, the elderly butler who'd worked for the Ravenshear family since before Lyra was born, stood in the hallway. He was thin and stooped with gentle eyes and hands that trembled slightly with age or palsy. His voice was kind. "Lord Ravenshear requests your presence in the library, Dr. Hargrove, at your earliest convenience." Dr. Hargrove, not Miss Hargrove, not the maid. Her proper title spoken with respect. "I'll be right there. Edmund, can you stay with Cassiel?" "Of course, Doctor. We'll be fine. Won't we, young miss?" Cassiel nodded, already exploring the sitting room with her hands mapping the furniture in her mental geography. Lyra changed out of the black uniform she'd worn for 6 months, put on the one civilian dress she owned, navy blue, modest 6 years out of style, braided her hair, looked at herself in an ornate mirror and saw a stranger, a woman who'd taken money from a man claiming to be over 6 centuries old. A woman who'd agreed to pretend she might be someone's lost love because the alternative was homelessness. What did that make her? The library looked different in afternoon sunlight. The books lining the walls, thousands of them floor to ceiling, glowed warm amber in the light streaming through windows tall as trees. Ezekiel stood by one of those windows backlit, so he was more silhouette than man. He'd changed too. No formal suit, just a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows and dark trousers. Casual, almost human, except for the absolute stillness. Most people shifted weight constantly, adjusted posture, made 100 tiny unconscious movements. Ezekiel could have been a statue. "Thank you for coming." He gestured to a table near the fireplace. "I thought we should begin the verification process." "Begin what exactly?" "Proving it. What you are, who you were, what we are to each other." He walked to the table, moving with predatory grace. On it sat a leather journal worn soft with age and handling. This belonged to Serafina. She kept medical notes, case studies, treatment protocols she developed, observations about anatomy and disease that were decades ahead of contemporary understanding. Lyra approached cautiously, like the journal might bite. It was open to a page covered in handwriting. Elegant, precise. The letters perfectly formed, not a single cross-out or correction visible, and completely impossibly familiar. She'd seen that handwriting before, in her own notebooks from medical school, in the journals she'd kept during her residency, the same slant to the letters, the same pressure on upstrokes, the same unconscious habit of dotting I's with tiny circles instead of simple dots. "This is a trick." Her voice sounded distant in her own ears. "Someone forged this to mess with my head. Read it, please." Against her better judgment, her eyes dropped to the page. The entry was dated March 14, 1718, a case study of a patient with the falling sickness epilepsy in modern terminology. The observations were detailed, clinical, professional. The treatment protocol described was almost exactly what Lyra herself would have prescribed in a modern context. Valerian root to calm neural activity, controlled diet to maintain blood sugar stability, stress reduction through meditation and rest. At the bottom of the page, a single line in the same elegant hand. Personal note, the lavender tincture also helps with the headaches that plague me each full moon. Curious correlation. Must investigate further. Lyra's hand moved involuntarily to her temple. She got headaches. Every full moon, regular as clockwork, had since she was a teenager. The only thing that helped was lavender oil rubbed into her temples and the base of her skull. That's just a coincidence. Lots of people get headaches. Lots of people use lavender for, is it? Ezekiel opened another journal, then another. 13 volumes total lined up on the table like soldiers. She wrote compulsively. Medical observations, philosophical musings, personal reflections. I've kept them all these years. Perhaps you'd like to read more. Lyra stepped back from the table like it was on fire. I agreed to 90 days. I didn't agree to this. Whatever psychological game you're playing, it's not a game. The pain in his voice was raw enough to draw blood. I lost her, Lyra. I held Seraphina while she burned, while witch hunters tied her to a post in Edinburgh and set her on fire because they were terrified of her intelligence, her power, her refusal to be small and silent and obedient. I tried to save her. God knows I tried. But I was too late, always too late. She burned in my arms, and her last words were, "Find me." So I've searched. For 612 years, every face, every crowd, every country, hoping. And now you're here and you have her mark, her handwriting, her scent, her soul, and you won't even consider, I'm not her. The words exploded out of Lyra like a shockwave. I'm me. I'm a real person, not some ghost wearing meat. I sold my house to pay for my husband's treatment. I watched him die over 18 months, piece by piece. I held my daughter when she went blind, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. That's my life. My pain, my history. Not some 18th century romance novel. Mine. Silence crashed over the library like a breaking wave. Heavy, suffocating. Ezekiel's shoulders sagged. He looked every one of his 612 years in that moment. You're right. I apologize. This was too much too soon. I'm pushing you because I'm desperate, and desperation makes us cruel. He closed the journals with careful hands. The Vampire Council arrives at sunset tomorrow. They've agreed to perform the traditional verification ceremony. When a soul-bonded pair is allegedly reunited, the council must witness and validate the claim. It's old law, very old. But if you'd rather not participate, what does it involve, this ceremony? 7 tests. You'll be presented with 7 personal objects that belong to Seraphina. You must identify each one and explain its significance. If you're truly her soul returned reborn into a new life, the knowledge will be there, buried deep perhaps, unconscious, but accessible. 7 tests, 90 days, then freedom and a clean slate and the ability to practice medicine again. Fine, I'll do your tests, but when I fail, and I will fail, because I'm not a reincarnated 18th century noblewoman, you accept it. You let us go. No arguments, no more checks. We're done. Agreed. You have my word. He offered his hand to shake on it. She took it. The jolt of contact was weaker this time, but still present. A current running between their palms, warm and insistent, and impossible to ignore. When she pulled away, her shoulder blade was burning. That night, Lyra dreamed. Not of James dying in the hospice, not of surgeries gone wrong or bills she couldn't pay. She dreamed of standing in a field of sunflowers under an impossibly blue sky, her hands glowing like captured starlight. Light poured from her palms, warm and golden and alive. And a voice not her own but somehow familiar whispered in her ear, "When darkness comes, remember you are the dawn. You have always been the dawn." She woke with her palms warm, faintly luminescent. The glow faded in seconds, but it had been there. Real. Impossible, but real. She didn't sleep again that night. The Vampire Council arrived at dusk in 3 black cars that moved without headlights, silent as shadows. Lyra watched from the window of the lavender suite as they wound up the long gravel drive to Ravenshire Estate. 3 vampires emerged, 2 men and 1 woman. All of them appeared to be in their 40s or 50s, but they moved with the careful deliberation of beings who'd perfected every gesture over centuries. Old, not in appearance but in essence. "Mama, they're here." Cassiel pressed against Lyra's side, her sightless eyes tracking something only she could perceive. "The ancient ones. Their colors are strange, like oil on water. All the colors at once, shifting and changing. Stay very close to me tonight. No wandering. Promise me." "I promise." The verification ceremony was held in the grand hall, a cavernous room Lyra had only seen while cleaning. At night, lit by hundreds of candles in iron chandeliers, it looked like something from a Gothic fairy tale. Vaulted ceilings painted with frescoes of angels and demons locked in eternal combat. Stained glass windows depicting battles and martyrs and moments of terrible beauty. A marble floor polished to a mirror shine that reflected the candlelight like a lake of fire. Ezekiel stood at one end of the hall wearing a formal black suit that made him look like a Victorian mourner attending his own funeral. The council members arranged themselves in a precise semicircle. Edmund guided Lyra to the center of the hall, then retreated to the shadows with Cassiel. The woman stepped forward first. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, with bone-white hair piled high in an elaborate style, and eyes the color of amber or old whiskey or autumn leaves about to fall. Everything about her radiated controlled power. "I am Lady Morgana Frost, First Seat of the North American Vampire Council." Her voice carried through the hall without effort. "We are here to verify the claim that you, Dr. Lyra Evangeline Hargrove, are the reincarnated soul of Lady Seraphina Ravenshire, who died March 15, 1720, in Edinburgh, Scotland, during the witch purges." Lyra's mouth was dry as sand. "I understand. The test is simple in structure, complex in execution. 7 objects belonging to Lady Seraphina will be presented to you one at a time. You will identify each object and explain its personal significance to her life. You may handle them. You may take as long as you need, but you may not ask for help or guidance." Lady Morgana's gaze was pitiless, ancient. "If you fail even one identification, the soul bond is declared false, and Lord Ravenshire must accept that his centuries-long search has ended in failure. If you succeed in all 7, the bond is verified, and you will be formally recognized as the returned queen. Do you consent to this test?" No. Every cell in her body screamed no. This was insane. She was a doctor, a woman of science and evidence. She didn't believe in reincarnation or soul bonds or any of this medieval mysticism. But $480,000 in clear debt said she'd at least try. What did she have to lose? "I consent." Edmund brought the first object on a velvet cushion. A locket. Silver tarnished black with age on a delicate chain that looked like it would snap if you breathed on it too hard. Lyra picked it up carefully. The metal was warm. Too warm, like someone had just been wearing it against living skin. She opened it without conscious thought, her fingers finding the hidden catch instinctively. Inside were 2 miniature portraits painted on ivory. A man and a woman. The style was clearly 18th century, the clothing, the pose, the techniques. The paint had faded, but was still visible. The man was Ezekiel younger and actually smiling. The woman had dark hair and violet eyes and a star-shaped mark on her exposed shoulder. "It's a wedding gift." The words came from somewhere deep inside her, bypassing conscious thought entirely. "He gave it to me to her, to Seraphina, on their wedding night. June 21st, 1716, midsummer." The portraits were painted in secret by an artist from France who owed Ezekiel a favor. "We couldn't marry publicly. His family would never have approved of a human bride, so we married in the woods at midnight with only the moon as witness." Lady Morgana's eyebrow lifted, a precise millimeter. Why would his family object to a human? Because she was human, and he was... Lyra stopped, blinked, looked at Ezekiel in confusion. I don't know. I don't know why I said that. I don't know any of this. Continue with the remaining objects. The second object made Lyra's doctor instincts kick in immediately. A surgical knife, primitive by modern standards, but well-crafted. The blade was still sharp after 3 centuries. She tested it with her thumb without thinking the exact way she'd tested scalpels thousands of times in operating rooms. She used this for amputations during the Jacobite uprising. Field medicine in 1715 when the Highland rebels clashed with English forces. She saved 17 soldiers before the retreat at Sheriff Muir. She hated it, hated cutting. Serafina wanted to heal, not maim. But sometimes amputation was the only way to save a life from gangrene. The knowledge poured out of her like water from a broken dam, unstoppable, undeniable. The third object, a dried flower. Lavender somehow preserved for 300 years, still faintly fragrant. From our garden. We grew it for the headaches that came with every full moon, and because it reminded her of her mother who died when Serafina was 7. Her mother's name was Eleanor. She used to make lavender sachets. The fourth, a book of poetry, spine-cracked pages, dog-eared and marked with annotations in that familiar handwriting. Milton, Paradise Lost, her favorite. She read it to Ezekiel on nights when his nightmares got too bad. Nightmares about the Crusades, about Jerusalem in 1187, about things he'd done that couldn't be undone. The fifth, a silver ring, simple and unadorned, worn smooth by centuries of handling. His mother's wedding ring, the only thing he had left of her after she died in the plague. He gave it to Serafina as a promise. I will love you beyond death, beyond time, beyond the ending of all things. Those exact words. The sixth object made Lyra's hand hesitate. A small glass vial containing dark liquid that looked like old blood. Poison, hemlock extract. She made it herself from plants in the garden, not to kill anyone, to escape if the witch hunters came. She'd rather die by her own hand than burn. She kept it hidden in... Lyra's eyes went unfocused, seeing something that wasn't there. In a hollow book, Ovid's Metamorphoses, on the 3rd shelf in the library. The room was dead silent. The seventh and final object was brought out with Edmund's hands visibly shaking. A portrait miniature no larger than a playing card. The paint was darkened with soot. The ivory backing was warped and cracked from heat, but the image was still visible, a woman's face, beautiful and serene. Lyra took it, turned it over. On the back, in that familiar handwriting, blackened but legible, 4E. When darkness comes, remember light exists. The room spun. Time collapsed. Past and present merged into a single terrible moment of absolute clarity. She saw it all. The mob with their torches. The accusations of witchcraft because Serafina could read Latin, and Greek because she practiced medicine, because she refused to be silent and small and obedient. The trial that was no trial at all, just a formality before execution, standing in the town square in Edinburgh tied to a wooden post, surrounded by kindling that smelled like pine and death. Ezekiel fighting through the crowd. Too late, all was too late, the flames rising, the smoke choking her lungs, the pain beyond description. And then floating above her burning body, looking down at Ezekiel, screaming her name, until his voice broke, she'd whispered a promise into the wind, I will find you. The stars will guide me home. Wait for me, my love, wait for me. Lyra dropped the miniature, staggered backward. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. I can't do this. This isn't real. This isn't... You've identified all 7 objects, Dr. Hargrove. Lady Morgana's voice was surprisingly gentle. The soul bond is verified. You are the returned queen. No, tears streamed down Lyra's face. I'm not her. I'm not. I'm just me. Just Lyra. Just a widow from Virginia who made mistakes and lost everything. I'm not... but the birthmark on her shoulder was blazing like a brand, and somewhere in the locked rooms of her mind, a door had swung wide open. Behind it were 612 years of grief and waiting and love that death couldn't kill. Ezekiel moved toward her, slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away. When she couldn't, frozen by shock and recognition and impossible memory, he knelt. Actually knelt on the marble floor in front of the entire vampire council and household staff, a king kneeling before a broke widow in a 6-year-old dress. I don't expect you to remember everything immediately. I don't expect you to love me as Seraphina loved me. But please, Lyra, let me protect you this time. Let me keep you safe. I failed once. I won't fail again. Lyra looked down at him. This impossible man, this creature who'd lived through the Crusades and the Renaissance and 2 world wars and still carried the weight of one woman's death like an open wound in his chest. From across the hall, Cassiel's clear voice rang out. "Mama, his blue just turned gold. Pure gold, like sunrise. He's telling the absolute truth." The room held its breath. Lyra's hand reached out, not consciously, her body moving on its own, and touched Ezekiel's silver hair. The moment her fingers made contact, light bloomed. Not metaphorical, actual light, soft and golden, emanating from her palm. It spread across Ezekiel's face like dawn breaking, and for just a second the room was filled with radiance, warm as summer sun. Then it faded, but everyone had seen it. The Queen's gift, light magic. They'd thought it was lost forever. Lady Morgana's eyes were wide. The legends were true. She carries the dawn. In his office in the East Wing, Cornelius Blackwell watched the ceremony through security cameras he'd installed months ago. He'd seen enough, more than enough. The Queen was verified, which meant Phase 2 could accelerate. He descended from his office to the secure room he'd built in secret, hidden behind a bookshelf that looked like all the others. Inside was a safe. Inside the safe were documents that would destroy Lord Ezekiel Ravenshrew's contracts with shell corporations. Wire transfer records showing $50 million systematically embezzled from the Ravensshire Trust over the past decade, and the crown jewel, a contract he'd prepared months ago. A simple investment transfer on the surface. But Clause 17, buried in legal jargon on page 9, was pure poison. In the event of Lord Ravenshire's incapacitation or death by any means, all assets, properties, and voting shares shall transfer in full to the Chief Financial Officer, Cornelius Blackwell Esquire. 280 years of loyal service, watching, waiting, playing the perfect servant while skimming millions and preparing for this exact moment. But first, he needed Ezekiel weakened, distracted, vulnerable. He pulled out a crystal decanter filled with amber liquid, whiskey, a rare blend he'd been serving to Lord Ravenshire every evening for the past 6 months. Ezekiel's mighty vampire constitution could process almost any poison, but liquid silver was different. 3 drops per night suspended in alcohol, slow-acting, cumulative. By now, Ezekiel's system should be saturated. Cornelius poured himself a glass from a different bottle, pure, untainted whiskey, and raised it to the empty room. To 612 years of your pathetic grief, and to 3 days until I own everything you've built. He drank, smiled, and began making calls. The first was to Mrs. Isolde Thorne. "The Queen is verified. Dreadmore needs to know. Make your report." The second was to a clinic in Switzerland. "I need the asset moved tonight." "Yes, the child. Leverage is everything." The third was to his lawyer in the Caymans. "Prepare the transfer documents. It's almost time." The end game, 280 years in the making, was finally here, and Cornelius Blackwell intended to win. Ezekiel collapsed on the archery range 3 days after the verification ceremony. One moment he was teaching Cassiel how to shoot his hand steady as he guided her grip on the composite bow. The next, his legs gave out. He hit the ground hard, his body convulsing. Silver lines blazed across his exposed forearms, intricate patterns like cracks in porcelain spreading from his hands toward his heart. Cassiel screamed. Lyra was beside him in seconds, her doctor training overriding panic. She checked his pulse. Weak, arrhythmic, wrong. His skin was cold as marble. The silver lines pulsed with each irregular heartbeat, converging on his chest like roads leading to Rome. "Edmund," Lyra shouted toward the estate, "I need my medical bag. Now," but even as she gave orders, her mind was racing through differential diagnoses. The symptoms matched nothing in conventional medicine: seizures, hypothermia, some kind of systemic toxicity spreading through his vascular system. The silver lines under his skin weren't metaphorical, they were literal. Particulate matter in his bloodstream. Poisoning. Someone was poisoning him. The revelation hit like lightning. The weakness he'd mentioned, the tremors in his hands, the blurred vision. All symptoms that had started around the same time Lyra arrived at Ravenshire Estate. And Ezekiel had mentioned, what was it that Cornelius had suggested? A new whiskey blend. Cornelius, the chief financial officer who'd served the family for 280 years. Edmund arrived gasping, clutching the medical bag Lyra hadn't touched in 2 years. She ripped it open, pulled out her stethoscope, listened to Ezekiel's heart. Ventricular fibrillation. Chaotic. If he'd been human, he'd already be dead, but he wasn't human, which meant conventional treatment wouldn't work. Think. Think like a combat surgeon. What did you have in Iraq when there was no hospital, no equipment, nothing but your hands and your brain, and soldiers dying because you weren't fast enough, smart enough, good enough? Ice, Lyra snapped at Edmund. As much as you can carry. And a car battery from the garage. Move. The old butler ran. Lyra turned to Cassiel. Baby, I need you to be my eyes. Look at his aura. Tell me where the poison is concentrated. Her daughter knelt in the grass, those sightless violet eyes, tracking patterns only she could perceive. It's in his blood, Mama. Silver threads, like spider webs wrapped around his heart, squeezing tighter with every beat. Silver poisoning in a vampire's bloodstream, like mercury poisoning in humans. Toxic, potentially fatal. But Lyra had treated heavy metal poisoning before. The principle was the same: extract the toxin before it reached critical organs. But how do you extract silver from blood without dialysis equipment? The answer came from a surgery she'd performed in Fallujah, a Marine with shrapnel embedded too deep for conventional extraction. She'd used electromagnetic induction, a car battery and jumper cables creating a magnetic field strong enough to pull metal fragments through tissue toward the surface. Silver wasn't naturally magnetic. But if the poison was colloidal silver suspended in liquid form, if it was particulate, she could use the same principle. Edmund returned with a bucket of ice and jumper cables. Dr. Hargrove, what are you? No time. Lyra ripped Ezekiel's shirt open, dumped ice across his chest. Hypothermia would slow his metabolism, slow the poison spread, buy her precious minutes. She grabbed the jumper cables and attached one to the positive terminal, one to negative. Then she did something that would have gotten her arrested in any civilian hospital. She pushed the exposed copper ends directly into the ice, covering Ezekiel's chest, creating an electromagnetic field in direct contact with his body. Cassiel watched the silver threads. Tell me if they move. Her daughter's eyes went wide. They're pulling toward the metal like they want to escape. It was working. The silver particles were responding to the electromagnetic field. Lyra adjusted the cable's position, moving them in slow circles over Ezekiel's heart, drawing the poison out, pulling it away from vital tissue toward the ice where it would crystallize and separate from his blood. 5 minutes. 10. Ezekiel's convulsions slowed. His breathing steadied. The silver lines on his skin began to fade like a tide going out. Finally, Lyra saw it. In the melted ice water pooling on his chest, tiny silver particles, hundreds of them, thousands, suspended in pink-tinged water. She'd done it. saved him using battlefield improvisation and desperation. Ezekiel's eyes opened, gray, clear, focused. "You saved my life. Don't talk. You need rest. You need to know who did this." His voice was steel wrapped in ice. "This wasn't an accident. This was attempted murder over months. Systematic poisoning." Cassiel's small voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Blackwell's office. The poison came from there. I can see the trail in the aura threads. It goes from Grandpa's heart all the way to the east wing, 3rd floor, the room with dark wood and the smell of old paper and older lies." Edmund's face went ashen. "That's the CFO's private office. But Sir Mr. Blackwell has served your family for 280 years. Ezekiel sat up too fast. Lyra tried to push him back down, but it was like pushing against granite, which means he's been planning this for decades, possibly centuries. We need proof, evidence that will hold up before the council. "Then we get it tonight," Lyra said. "But you're not going anywhere until I've run a full examination. You just had a near-fatal toxic episode. You need—" "I'm a vampire, Dr. Hargrove. We heal fast. I'll be fine." "You're also my patient, and my patient will sit still while I check his vitals, or I'll sedate you with enough tranquilizer to drop an elephant." For the first time since the poisoning, Ezekiel smiled. A real smile. "Serafina used to threaten me with sedation too. She was very insistent about patient cooperation. Smart woman. Now hold still." They broke into Cornelius Blackwell's office at 2 a.m. Broke in was generous. Ezekiel simply tore the locked door off its hinges with his bare hands and set it aside like cardboard. Inside was a shrine to meticulous order. Everything had its place. Mahogany desk, leather chair, filing cabinets labeled with obsessive precision, a portrait of some long-dead Ravenshire on the wall, and prominently displayed on the desk a crystal decanter filled with amber liquid that caught the moonlight. Ezekiel lifted it, sniffed. His face went hard. "Whiskey. The exact blend Cornelius has been bringing to my study every night for 6 months. For the stress," he said, "to help you relax." Lyra took it from him, poured a small amount into a glass, held it up to the lamplight. There a faint shimmer, metallic, unnatural. Liquid silver, suspended in alcohol. 3 drops per night, you said. Every night. Like clockwork, always served at 9 p.m. exactly. Slow poisoning, small enough doses that you'd attribute symptoms to stress or fatigue. Brilliant, actually. By the time you realized something was wrong, the damage would be catastrophic. She set the glass down carefully, like it might explode. But why? What does he gain from killing you? Edmund was already at the filing cabinets, his trembling hands surprisingly efficient. "Lord Ravenshire, you need to see this." The files were meticulous. Wire transfer records going back a decade, shell corporations with names like Thornfield Holdings and Ravenshire International Development, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Luxembourg, and at the bottom of the drawer a contract with Lord Ravenshire's signature, or an extremely good forgery. Ezekiel read it, his face getting colder with each sentence. $50 million. Embezzled from the Ravenshire Trust over 10 years, funneled through fake companies, and this clause on page 9, he pointed with a shaking finger. "If I die or become incapacitated, all assets transfer to the chief financial officer. Everything, the estate, the investments, 612 years of accumulated wealth, all of it." "He's been planning this for decades," Edmund whispered, waiting for the perfect moment. "The Queen's return," Lyra said. "He knew you'd be distracted, vulnerable, emotional. He used your love as a weapon against you." Cassiel tugged on Lyra's sleeve. "Mama, there's more. In the safe behind that painting. I can see it glowing. Dark magic. Contracts written in blood and betrayal." The safe was old-fashioned. Combination lock. Ezekiel ripped the entire painting off the wall and crushed the lock mechanism with one hand. Inside were more documents. Names Lyra didn't recognize. Payment receipts. and a ledger listing 12 staff members each receiving monthly deposits from an account registered to Dreadmore Holdings, LLC. Ezekiel's finger stopped on one name. His voice was hollow. Mrs. Isolde Thorne, the head housekeeper, 45 years of service, a spy the entire time. "We call an emergency council session." Lyra said, her mind already working through the legal strategy. "Present this evidence. Formal charges. Let them handle. Already done." Edmund had his phone to his ear. "Lady Morgana, emergency situation. Yes, ma'am. Tonight. I understand. 1 hour." He hung up. "The council convenes in 60 minutes. Grand Hall. They'll hear the evidence, Lord Ravenshire, but you'll need to present it formally with proper protocol and witnesses." Ezekiel gathered the files with shaking hands. "Then Cornelius Blackwell is about to learn what happens when you betray someone who survived the Crusades, the Black Death, the French Revolution, 2 world wars, and 612 years of grief." But before they could leave the office, Cassiel made a small sound of distress. "What is it, baby?" Lyra knelt beside her. "I need to talk to Mr. Blackwell before the trial. Please, Mama, there's something he needs to know. Something about his aura I have to tell him." "Absolutely not. He's dangerous. He tried to kill—" "I'll be with her," Edmund said quietly. "I won't let anything happen to the young miss. But if she says it's important, I believe her. The child sees things we don't." Lyra looked at Cassiel's determined face. Her daughter, 9 years old and braver than soldiers twice her age. 5 minutes, I'll be right outside the door. The holding cell was in the basement. Cornelius Blackwell sat on a narrow bench looking perfectly composed despite his imprisonment. His suit was still immaculate, his silver hair perfectly combed. He looked like a CFO waiting for a board meeting, not a criminal awaiting trial. When Cassiel entered with Edmund, Cornelius's expression didn't change. "A blind child. How quaint. You can't possibly see me, little girl." "I see your aura, Mr. Blackwell." Cassiel stood in the center of the cell, her sightless eyes seeming to look right through him. "It's turning gray, like smoke from a dying fire, like ash and endings." He stiffened. "What nonsense is this?" "The poison you gave Lord Ravenshire. You tested it on yourself first, didn't you, to make sure the dosage was right, to make sure it would work slowly enough that he wouldn't suspect. But you made a mistake, Mr. Blackwell. You took too much during your testing. And silver poisoning is cumulative, even in vampires." Cornelius's hand moved unconsciously to his chest. Felt the faint tremor there, the weakness he'd been attributing to age and stress. "Your aura shows me 3 days, Mr. Blackwell, maybe 4 if you rest. Then your heart will stop. The same poison you used as a weapon is killing you too." The color drained from his face. "That's impossible. I was careful. I calculated—" "You calculated wrong. I can see the silver threads wrapped around your heart, just like they were around Lord Ravenshire's. Except his are gone now. My mama saved him, but there's nobody to save you." Cornelius stood abruptly, paced the small cell. His perfect composure was cracking. "If what you say is true, and I'm not admitting anything, but if it were true, could your mother, could Dr. Hargrove—" "Maybe, if you confessed everything. If you told the council the whole truth, if you cooperated fully, maybe then they'd let her try to save you." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Or you can keep your secrets, Mr. Blackwell. Keep your pride and your schemes, and die in 3 days, knowing that you poisoned yourself trying to murder someone who only ever trusted you." Cassiel walked out. The door closed, and Cornelius Blackwell was left alone with the knowledge that he'd engineered his own death. The Grand Hall filled with vampires summoned by emergency decree. Over 100 of them, the most powerful creatures in North America, arranged in concentric circles according to age and status. The oldest beings who remembered Rome and Athens and civilizations whose names had been forgotten occupied the inner ring. Lady Morgana sat on her throne-like chair, her amber eyes reflecting candlelight like a predator's. Lyra stood beside Ezekiel, clutching the files like weapons. Cassiel held her hand. Cornelius Blackwell entered last, escorted by guards. He looked perfect, composed. the very picture of a loyal servant falsely accused. When he saw the evidence in Ezekiel's hands, his expression didn't change. Not even a flicker. "Thank you all for attending this emergency session." Lady Morgana's voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a blade. "Lord Ravenshire has made serious accusations against his chief financial officer. Mr. Blackwell, you stand accused of embezzlement, attempted murder through systematic poisoning, and conspiracy. How do you plead?" Cornelius smiled, reasonable, regretful. "Not guilty, of course. These accusations are the unfortunate result of Lord Ravenshire's deteriorating mental state. He's been unwell, paranoid. The stress of the Queen's return has clearly clouded his judgment. I've served this family loyally for 280 years. These charges are absurd." "Then you won't object to examining the evidence?" Ezekiel stepped forward, laid out the wire transfers, the offshore accounts, the poisoned whiskey, the contract with its buried clause. The council leaned in, examined, whispered among themselves. "These documents could be forgeries," Cornelius said smoothly. "Dr. Hargrove is new to our world. She has no legal standing in vampire affairs. For all we know, she manufactured this evidence to ingratiate herself with Lord Ravenshire, who conveniently paid her crushing debt. What wouldn't a desperate woman do for the man who saved her from financial ruin?" The insinuation hung in the air. Ugly, effective. Several council members nodded thoughtfully. Lyra's hands clenched into fists. "I'm a doctor, not a forger. I took an oath to do no harm. You're a desperate widow with a blind child and no prospects. You took an oath to survive." "Enough." Lady Morgana raised one pale hand. "The council will examine the documents through our forensic experts. Bank codes and account signatures can be verified independently. This will take time, but—" "We don't have time." Cassiel's voice rang out clear and certain. The entire hall turned to look at the small blind girl who'd spoken without permission. "Mr. Blackwell is lying. I can see it. His aura. It's black with deception. And there's red in it now. Fresh red, like blood that hasn't dried yet." Cornelius's smile didn't waver. "A child's imagination. Auras don't exist, young lady." "Don't they?" Cassiel walked toward him with the confidence of someone who could see perfectly. "You have 12 people on your secret payroll. Staff members who take money from someone called Magnus Dreadmore. Mrs. Thorne is one of them. She's standing right there in the back of the hall." Every head swiveled. Mrs. Isolde Thorne stood among the household staff, her face draining of color. "That's ridiculous," she sputtered. "I've served this estate for 45 years with nothing but devotion. Serving 2 masters," Ezekiel said coldly. "Cornelius has the receipts. Monthly payments. $50,000 per year. All you had to do was report on my activities, my vulnerabilities, my weaknesses. And when the time came, you were supposed to open the gates for Dreadmore's forces. Let his army in. Help them kill me. Let Cornelius claim the estate in the chaos." For the first time, Cornelius's mask cracked. "Just a hairline fracture. You can't prove any of this." "Actually, we can." Edmund stepped forward holding a smartphone. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady. "I installed security cameras in your office 2 months ago, Mr. Blackwell. After the 3rd time, I caught you going through Lord Ravenshire's private files. I didn't know what you were planning, but I knew it wasn't right. Old servants develop instincts." He pressed play on the video. The footage was crystal clear. Cornelius in his office, opening the safe, counting money, making phone calls. And then the smoking gun, a conversation recorded 3 days ago. Cornelius's voice, "It's Blackwell. The Queen is verified. Ravenshire is weakened from the poisoning. I need the asset moved tonight." "Yes, the child. Leverage is everything. Dreadmore's forces should be in position by—" The hall erupted. Shouts. Accusations. Cornelius backed away, his hand moving toward his jacket. "Don't!" Ezekiel was across the room in a blur. He grabbed Cornelius's wrist, twisted with surgical precision. A small pistol clattered to the marble floor. Silver bullets gleamed in the candlelight. "Your backup plan, of course. Always thinking ahead, weren't you, Cornelius? You self-righteous fool." Cornelius's composure shattered completely, his face contorted with 280 years of suppressed rage. "Do you know what it's like? Watching you brood over a woman who's been dead for centuries while the estate crumbles? You're weak, pathetic, mired in the past. Dreadmore will do what you never could, build an empire that actually matters." "Then you should have joined him openly instead of poisoning the man who trusted you." "Trust?" Cornelius laughed high and hysterical. "You trusted me to clean up your messes, to balance books you never looked at, to run an estate you barely lived in while you wallowed in grief. I earned this money, Ezekiel, every penny. And now—" The windows exploded inward. Glass rained down like deadly snow as dark shapes poured through the openings. Vampires, dozens of them wearing tactical gear and moving with military precision. Dreadmore's army had arrived right on schedule. In the chaos, Mrs. Thorne pulled a gun from her apron, small, efficient, deadly. She pointed it not at Ezekiel, but at Cassiel. "Nobody moves," she screamed, her voice cracking, "or the child dies right now." Everything stopped. The invading vampires, the council members. Even Ezekiel, halfway across the room, froze mid-step. Mrs. Thorne's hand was shaking, but her finger was on the trigger. "Lord Dreadmore sends his regards. This estate now belongs to him. Surrender peacefully, and the child lives. Resist, and I paint these walls with her blood." Lyra didn't think, didn't hesitate. 15 years of surgical training, 4 years of combat, muscle memory deeper than thought. She grabbed a heavy iron candlestick from the nearest table, threw it with the precision of a surgeon who'd spent years targeting tumors measured in millimeters. It hit Mrs. Thorne's wrist with a sickening crack. The gun went off the bullet, punching harmlessly into ancient plaster. Cassiel screamed. Then the grand hall became a war zone. Ezekiel's security forces, vampires loyal to Ravenshire, engaged Dreadmore's invaders. The hall filled with snarls and gunfire and the wet sounds of hand-to-hand combat. Blood splattered across marble. Ancient bodies fighting with modern weapons. Lyra grabbed Cassiel and ran for the servants' entrance. Behind her, she heard Ezekiel roar a sound that wasn't human, wasn't civilized, was pure apex predator defending his territory. "This way." Edmund appeared in the doorway, waving frantically. "The safe room. It's—" A vampire in tactical gear materialized behind him. Young, fast, enhanced reflexes. He grabbed Edmund by the throat and lifted the elderly butler off the ground like he weighed nothing. Lyra didn't hesitate. She pulled the emergency scalpel from her medical bag, silver-plated standard Army Medical Corps issue from Iraq, and drove it into the vampire's kidney with surgical precision. The creature shrieked, dropped Edmund. Lyra grabbed the butler and ran Cassiel's hand tight in hers. The safe room was in the basement, reinforced steel door, biometric lock requiring a registered handprint. Edmund's hand was shaking too badly to activate the scanner. "Let me." Lyra pressed his palm flat against the reader. The lock clicked. The door swung open to reveal a room lined with weapons supplies and communication equipment. But before she could push Cassiel inside, Edmund gasped. "Dr. Hargrove behind you." A vampire in Dreadmore's tactical gear had followed them. He grabbed Edmund from behind, one arm around the old butler's throat. "The safe room. Perfect. I'll need the girl for leverage. Hand her over." "Run, doctor," Edmund shouted. "Get young miss to safety." The vampire snapped Edmund's neck with casual efficiency. The old butler's body dropped like a puppet with cut strings. "No!" Lyra's scream was rage and grief combined. Edmund. Kind Edmund, who'd helped them, who'd stood with them, who'd protected them. She shoved Cassiel into the safe room. "Lock it behind me. Don't open for anyone but me or Ezekiel. Mama no." Lyra sealed the door, heard the biometric lock engage, turned to face the vampire who'd killed Edmund. He was young, cocky, fast. He had every advantage. But Lyra had been a combat surgeon in Fallujah. She'd learned to fight in places where hesitation meant death. The silver scalpel was still in her hand. She feinted left, went right, drove the blade into his femoral artery. He howled. She twisted, pushed deeper, hit the bone. He backhanded her. She flew across the corridor, hit the wall hard enough to crack plaster. Her vision swam. Blood filled her mouth. But she'd bought time. The vampire was on the ground bleeding silver-tainted blood from a severed artery. He'd heal eventually, but not before Cassiel was safe. Lyra staggered back toward the grand hall. She had to help Ezekiel. Had to. The corridor spun. The world went dark. She woke to strong arms carrying her. Ezekiel's voice in her ear. "I've got you. Stay with me, Lyra. Stay with me. Cassiel's safe room. Edmund got her to safety. Ezekiel's voice broke. He's gone, but he saved her. Lyra's mind registered through the haze of pain and concussion. Edmund got Cassiel to safety. Past tense. He'd opened the safe room, secured Cassiel inside then. Then Mrs. Thorne had arrived with a vampire squad, had knocked Edmund unconscious, had dragged his unconscious body to the safe room. The biometric lock accepted any registered palm within 10 minutes of initial activation. A security feature Edmund had mentioned once designed to prevent accidental lockouts. Mrs. Thorne had used Edmund's hand to open the sealed room, had taken Cassiel. "No," Lyra whispered. "No, no, no. They have her." Ezekiel's face was anguished. Dreadmore's forces retreated. They took Cassiel as a hostage, as leverage. The grand hall was carnage, 20 vampires down, more wounded, blood on ancient marble, and in the center of it all, a vampire Lyra had never seen before. He was tall, broad, wearing a white suit that somehow remained spotless despite the chaos. When he smiled, it was the smile of a predator who'd already won. "Lord Ezekiel Ravenshire," his voice carried through the battle-scarred hall. "You've made this harder than necessary. Surrender the estate, acknowledge my territorial claim, and I'll return the child unharmed." Ezekiel, bleeding from a dozen wounds, stood tall. "Never." "Then I'll take what I want. Your estate, your wealth, and—" Sovereign Magnus Dreadmore gestured. 2 of his soldiers dragged in a struggling figure, Cassiel. Lyra's heart stopped. Her daughter, her baby, in the hands of monsters. "The child is leverage," Dreadmore continued conversationally, "but what I really want is the queen, her blood. Legend says consuming it grants vampires the power to walk in sunlight. Imagine, our kind freed from our greatest weakness." He walked toward Lyra with the casual confidence of absolute power. "I have extensive research on this, Dr. Hargrove. The Queen's blood doesn't just grant temporary immunity like those fragile daylight rings that crack and fail. It's permanent, evolutionary. True freedom from the tyranny of darkness." He pulled out a knife, silver blade gleaming. "I'll make this quick. For your cooperation, I'll let your daughter live. Refuse and she dies first. Slowly." Lyra looked at Cassiel, held by monsters, looked at Ezekiel, bleeding and broken, looked at the knife in Dreadmore's hand, made her choice. "Let her go. I'll give you what you want." "Lyra, no." Ezekiel tried to stand. Dreadmore's soldiers held him down. "It's okay." She met those ancient gray eyes. "You've been protecting people for 612 years. Let me protect someone this time." She walked toward Dreadmore, offered her arm. "Just don't hurt my daughter." The Sovereign grabbed her wrist, raised the knife, and Lyra felt it. The birthmark on her shoulder blade, not burning this time, exploding, like the sun itself had been compressed into that star-shaped seal and was finally breaking free. Light erupted from her body, not candlelight, not lamplight. Solar radiance, pure, blinding, the kind of light that vampires couldn't survive. Dreadmore screamed, dropped the knife, staggered back as his skin blistered and cracked. Around the room, his soldiers shrieked and fled toward any shadows they could find. But there were no shadows. Lyra was the sun incarnate. The power poured out of her in waves. She didn't understand it, couldn't control it, but she could direct it. At Dreadmore, at the vampires holding Cassiel, at anyone who threatened her family. "You wanted my blood." Her voice echoed doubled, as if Seraphina was speaking through her. "You wanted the power of the Queen. Here it is, all of it." She raised her hand. The light intensified, focused became a laser that burned through the air itself. Dreadmore's skin began to crack. Fissures appeared glowing from within, like magma through broken earth. "Please," he gasped, his voice breaking. "Mercy! Did you show mercy to my daughter?" Lyra closed her fist. The light condensed, focused with surgical precision, punched through Dreadmore's chest exactly where his heart beat its last. For one eternal moment, his skeleton was visible through his flesh, every bone, every organ, illuminated from the inside like an X-ray made of pure sunlight. Then Sovereign Magnus Dreadmore, Lord of the Southern Territories, disintegrated, reduced to ash in seconds. His army fled. Those who couldn't escape the light fast enough died where they stood. Within minutes, it was over. Lyra collapsed. The light faded. Cassiel ran to her, tears streaming. "Mama, you did it. You saved everyone. Is she?" Ezekiel crawled over, pulled Lyra into his arms. "Please, not again. I can't lose you again." Lyra opened her eyes. Every cell in her body felt drained, exhausted. "I'm okay, just tired. What was that?" "The Queen's power. The reason witch hunters burned Seraphina. The reason I've protected your secret for 612 years across multiple lifetimes." He kissed her forehead with infinite gentleness. "You're so much more than you know." Lady Morgana approached, helping herself to her feet. The council elder surveyed the destruction with ancient eyes. "Well, that settles any remaining questions about legitimacy. The bond is clearly genuine. The power is real." She turned to Cornelius, cowering in a corner. "As for you, Mr. Blackwell, the council finds you guilty of treason, embezzlement, attempted regicide, and conspiracy to commit mass murder. The sentence is death by council execution." "Wait." Cornelius backed away, his perfect composure completely shattered. "I can give you information, bank accounts, Dreadmore's entire network. I know everything." "You know nothing of value anymore." Ezekiel stood slowly, moving like death itself. "But I'll give you a choice: execution by council law, or trial by combat with me." Cornelius looked at Ezekiel's eyes, saw 612 years of war, chose neither. He ran, pulled a vial from his jacket, the liquid silver he'd used to poison Ezekiel, drank it in one desperate gulp. The poison that had taken months to weaken Ezekiel consumed Cornelius in seconds. He burned from the inside out, screaming, thrashing, silver light pouring from his eyes and mouth, until there was nothing left but ash and the bitter scent of poetic justice. "Killed by his own weapon," Lady Morgana observed. "Appropriate." 18 months later. The Ravenshire Medical Clinic opened on a Tuesday morning in early spring. The building was new, modern glass and steel, designed to complement the Gothic aesthetic of the estate rather than clash with it. Inside was state-of-the-art equipment donated by the Ravenshire Trust. Outside was a simple sign: "Free medical care for veterans and their families. No one turned away. Dr. Lyra Hargrove, fully licensed and reinstated after passing her medical boards with perfect scores, saw her first patient at 9 a.m. A veteran from Afghanistan with PTSD and chronic pain. By noon, she'd seen 7 more. At 1 p.m., Ezekiel found her in the office reviewing patient files. Busy morning. 7 patients, 2 PTSD consultations, 1 prosthetic fitting, 3 follow-ups from last week. She smiled, genuine, happy. It feels good, helping people again, being a doctor again. You never stopped being a doctor. He handed her a cup of coffee fixed exactly how she liked it. "You saved my life with a car battery and jumper cables. You're more of a doctor than most people with 20 years of practice." We saved each other. On the desk between them sat 2 objects: a silver scalpel from Iraq, worn smooth from years of use, and the portrait miniature from 1720, cleaned and restored. "I've been thinking," Lyra said carefully, "about Seraphina, about who I was, who I am now, and I don't think I'm her, not entirely, but I carry pieces of her inside me, her knowledge, her memories, her love for you. It's like..." She searched for the right metaphor. Like I'm a house built on her foundation. Same bones, different rooms, similar architecture, but a completely new structure. Ezekiel nodded slowly. I can accept that. I fell in love with Seraphina 612 years ago, but I'm falling in love with Lyra now. Different women, same soul, both equally remarkable. Through the window they could see Cassiel in the garden behind the clinic, 11 years old now, teaching a group of young vampires' orphans Ezekiel had taken in after Dreadmore's organization collapsed how to navigate by sound and spatial awareness. Her blindness had become her gift, her strength. She wants to be a teacher, Lyra said. Says she can help other kids who are different, who don't fit the normal boxes. She learned from the best. Ezekiel took Lyra's hand. You know, there's something I still don't fully understand. How did you know I was being poisoned? You're brilliant, but you identified silver poisoning without any tests or equipment. How? I didn't know, I felt it. She touched her shoulder where the birthmark lay quiet now. Just a mark. Just a reminder. The soul bond, when you collapsed something inside me, screamed danger. The same way I know when Cassiel is frightened or when something threatens my family. I just knew. Family. Ezekiel tested the word like wine. I like the sound of that. Lady Morgana appeared in the doorway, her white hair gleaming in the spring sunlight. I hope I'm not interrupting. I came to check on the clinic's progress. Very impressive, Dr. Hargrove. Thank you, and thank you for the Council's continued support. We should be thanking you. By eliminating Dreadmore and exposing Blackwell's conspiracy network, you prevented a civil war. 12 co-conspirators arrested, 17 territories stabilized, peace in the vampire world for the first time in decades. The ancient vampire smiled. The Council has voted to formalize your position, Queen of the Eastern Seaboard, if you'll accept the title. Lyra looked at Ezekiel. What does that actually mean? Authority, protection, resources to do more of this. He gestured at the clinic. Help more people. Build something that lasts beyond our lifetimes. I'm not a politician. I'm a doctor. Exactly. Lady Morgana's amber eyes gleamed. You're a doctor. A soldier. A mother. A survivor. Someone who earned her crown through skill and sacrifice, not inheritance or birthright. That's precisely what we need. Someone who understands struggle. Someone who fights for people instead of power. Lyra thought about it. About James, who'd taught her to fight for what mattered. About the soldiers she'd saved in Iraq. About Cassiel growing up in a world where being different could be a strength instead of a weakness. Okay, but I have conditions. The clinic stays free. We expand to serve more veterans, human and vampire. And no politics. I don't care about territorial disputes. I care about people. All people. Agreed. Lady Morgana extended her hand. Welcome to the Council, Your Majesty. As the elder vampire left, Cassiel ran in muddy and laughing. Mama, Grandpa, Ezekiel. The roses bloomed early, all of them. The whole garden looks like a painting. They walked outside together. The estate grounds had been transformed over 18 months. What had been a Gothic fortress was now a sanctuary. Gardens where Cassiel taught. Therapy spaces for PTSD treatment. Playing fields where vampire and human children learned together. A place where broken people could heal. On the hill overlooking it all stood a memorial, 47 stones arranged in a circle. One for each soldier Ezekiel had lost at Omaha Beach in 1944, and one new stone, smaller, for Edmund. They visited every morning, left flowers, spoke names, remembered. You carry them well, Lyra said as they stood before the memorial. I carry them always, but it's lighter now, knowing I'm building something they would have believed in, something that honors their sacrifice. Do you think Seraphina would have approved of all this? Ezekiel looked at the clinic, the gardens, the children playing without fear. She always said the greatest power wasn't in titles or magic. It was in healing, in teaching, in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. He turned to Lyra. So yes, I think she'd be proud of what you've become, of what we've built together. The sun set over Ravenshire Estate. Golden light painted the Gothic spires and modern glass in equal measure. Ezekiel stood in it without flinching, the daylight ring Lyra had helped design, allowing him to experience sunlight for the first time in 612 years. "You know what I learned?" Lyra said quietly. "Through all of this, what? That honor isn't inherited. It's earned every single day. Through the choices we make, the people we protect, the legacy we build one decision at a time." And what legacy is that? She looked at her daughter laughing in the garden, at Ezekiel no longer alone, at the clinic that would save hundreds, at the memorial that remembered the fallen, at the scalpel on her desk, the tool she'd carried through war and loss and rebuilding. That skill matters more than title, that earned respect beats inherited power, that the people society calls broken are often the only ones strong enough to fix what's shattered. She touched the birthmark on her shoulder. Quiet now, just a star-shaped reminder of who she'd been and who she'd become. Because sometimes, Lyra said, the maid becomes the queen, not by magic or destiny, but by being the only one willing to stand up when everyone else kneels, by fighting when others flee, by healing when others hurt. Ezekiel pulled her close. "To earned crowns and hard-won peace." "To earned crowns," she echoed. And in the garden, Cassiel's laughter rang out like bells, the sound of joy that death couldn't kill and time couldn't fade, the sound of a family forged in fire and blood and impossible love, the sound of home. On Lyra's desk, the scalpel and the portrait sat side by side, past and present, Seraphina and Lyra, two women, one soul, both doctors. Both fighters, both queens who earned their crowns through service and sacrifice. The sun dipped below the horizon. Night came. And in Ravenshire Estate Sanctuary Clinic home, the lights came on, warm, welcoming, safe. A beacon promising that, even in darkness, dawn would always return.